Welcome to the Freedom to Start Fresh podcast. I'm joined today by Joseph Soffer, an excellent attorney that I've known for a few years now. Joseph, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
I'm really glad to have you here today. Again, we've known each other for a few years now, and you've been practicing for what, about 30 years now?
In total, it's closer to 40.
Closer to 40.
Yep, 1987.
When people come up to me and they ask me about you, the first thing that comes to my mind is you're the quintessential New York attorney, in that you're very aggressive and very loud. And so my question to you is, what was Joseph Soffer like at 5 years old, and what was a Soffer household like when you were 5 years old?
Sure, go ahead. Start with a question that you didn't tell me you'd be asking. 5 years old. Let's see if I can remember. So I'll tell you what it was. I can give you a great story that would come back to 5 years old. My mother will tell you this story anytime you ask her about a 5-year-old story from me. I grew up in Brooklyn, and there used to be a luncheonette very close to where we lived. My mother used to take me to the luncheonette maybe 2, 3 times a week to have a chocolate malted, because that was my favorite. And every time we went to have the chocolate malted, she would tell the gentleman behind the counter when he made the chocolate malted to add an EGG to the malted because she wanted it to be healthy.
What is it?
Thinking an EG.
What is an EGG?
Spell it.
Thanks.
EGG, the most expensive thing in New York, right? The most expensive thing in the country right now, right? And she would do this weekly. And then at some point, while I was 5 years old, my mother forgot to tell the gentleman behind the counter to put an EGG in the malted. So I said to the gentleman behind the counter, don't forget to put the egg in. So here she was thinking that I was not knowing what she was spelling out at 5 years old and telling the guy to put the egg in the malted all the time. I knew exactly what she was saying all the time. And I told the gentleman myself at 5 years old to make sure he put the egg in the malted because she had forgotten to tell him. So
Your mother, just
that's
like me 5 minutes ago or 2 minutes ago, is you were already ahead of the curve. You're way beyond us at that point.
exactly. In fact, it's actually funny because I actually started kindergarten a year earlier than anybody else. I was always a year younger. It's not that I made the year. I was just put in. What happened was they gave me some test when I was young, and I guess I passed with such flying colors that they said rather than start him in a nursery program, we're going to put him right into kindergarten. Right? I knew that the cube went into the square and the ball went into the circle. So every year throughout my schooling, I was always the youngest in the grade. And a lot of times I got made fun of for being the youngest in the grade, but every year I was always the youngest in every grade I went through school because I started school a year earlier than everybody else.
Do you think that's what led to your fighting spirit? I mean, the you're smaller, so you got to fight that much harder with
Right.
the older kids.
Right. I think that probably had a lot to do with it. I mean, I was bullied a lot growing up, bullied a lot, but I took it and I didn't care. And, I did what I could, when I could, how I could. And I think there's no question. I mean, look, it wasn't easy growing up in the streets of Brooklyn or the streets of New York when I was a kid. And my fighting spirit, probably a lot of it was derived from that type of an upbringing.
Do you have older siblings or younger siblings?
Oh, I'm younger. It's funny though, my younger sibling, right? So I'm actually 6 feet tall now. My younger sibling is actually 6'4",
Okay.
and he probably weighs about 100 pounds more than me. But the old joke around my house was, no matter how big he was, I would be the one that was always giving the orders.
Well, that's great. So what brought you into, I'm assuming that that fighting spirit, did that naturally lead into going into law, or what was your transition, and what made you decide that law was the right path for you?
Right. I mean, it probably was. I mean, I think that anybody that will ever tell you, including people in the office, will tell you that, I don't like to lose. And, if I feel pretty strongly about something, listen, if I'm wrong, I'm the first one to admit that I'm wrong. But I rarely think that I am wrong. So it doesn't happen a lot. And I will usually do my best to keep going until I convince the person that I'm talking to that I'm right.
Or you've worn them down so far that they just
Exactly,
can't deal
right.
with it anymore?
Exactly.
Is that your the arc? I don't know how you're. Would you say you take after your parents, or you the black sheep of the family, and that you're very forceful, very opinionated?
I think that it probably comes more from my dad. So my father, who is still alive and still going strong at 84 years old, he was somebody that born in Egypt, came to this country when he was about 15, 16 years old, never graduated high school, never went to college, never went to school, started a business, developed, one of those big jeans companies in the 80s that were so popular. They had all these jeans companies that were really, really big in the 80s. You had Sassoon and Jordache. Well, he had a company called Juju, Jou Designs, that back then was pretty popular. It was actually very popular even in Miami because a lot of South Americans used to buy a lot of what he made. But he was very, very strong in business and starting his business and getting his business going, and basically a rags to riches story, and was also very involved in a lot of political Jewish issues.
Okay.
They're very involved, saving cemeteries in Egypt and Lithuania and Eastern Europe, rescuing Syrian Jews from Syria, and to the point where he would go to Washington and meet with senators and congressmen and fight strongly to get the things he wanted to get done. And he achieved a lot. He's really achieved a lot over the years. And I think a lot of my energy and wanting, desire to win and to get what I think is right comes from him.
So when you approached him, you said, "Dad, I want to go to law school." Was he enthusiastic about it? Was he encouraging, or did he say, as maybe a lot of Jewish parents say, "Why don't you want to go to medical school?"
No, believe it or not, he was very encouraging about it, very supportive about it, always wanted me to do that. In fact, I went to undergrad at NYU. New York University. One of the reasons why I chose NYU was because NYU has a really, really great law school. So even from the beginning of college, even though where you go to law school really is not so much relevant on where you go to college, but in my father's mind, he was kind of like, well, if I go to NYU undergrad, I have a good shot of getting into NYU law school because I'm there and I can meet with people and talk to people and pursue things. So even from leaving where I grew up to go to NYU undergrad, he always thought law was the best thing for me. And just so you know, most Jewish parents, they don't care, doctor or lawyer, as long as it's one or the other, they're fine with that. Either
I was
one is good for them.
thinking about immigrant parents,
Yeah.
mine included. Well, myself, I wasn't born here originally, but definitely there's a pressure to go to medical school. So what drew you to wanting to become a lawyer?
So the original thought, believe it or not, was growing up, I had a friend, very, very close friend of mine, who was a couple years older than me. And we were inseparable. I mean, really inseparable. We were just so close, so tight. And for some reason, he always wanted to be a lawyer. He wanted to be a lawyer. So I just respected him and looked up to him and thought so much of him. And originally it was, okay, you want to be a lawyer? I'll be a lawyer too. That was the original thought. Right? That was the original thought. But then, okay, so now you're getting older, you're, going through high school and thinking about college and going to college. And so now, now reality hits, right? So now I'm thinking, okay, what do I want to do? Well, law was always in the back of my mind. So my thinking was, let me go see if I can work for a law firm for a couple of years in college and see if I like it. Oh, is this something I really want to do? And at the time was when my dad's jean company was very big. So my dad had several lawyers that he was working with, one of which was a trademark and patent law firm. And he wrote to all the lawyers that he was doing business with and said, listen, my son is at NYU and he'd like a job for the summer clerking. Any law firm needs somebody in college willing to work. And the trademark firm that he used for his jeans company wrote back and said, as a matter of fact, we have a very, very big case. We need somebody to come and help us out with the case. So I went to work. I went to this firm and I met with them and had a great interview with them, and they hired me. And so now I'm the summer of my junior year. summer of my junior year. Right now, remember, I'm a year younger, right? Most people graduate college at 22, right? So summer of junior year, I was probably about 20, I guess,
20?
because I was going to graduate, maybe even 19. No, I was 19, right? Because summer of senior year was 20 and I graduated at 21. So I was 19 years old, and this firm had a case where they represented a bank, First Nationwide Savings Bank, that was one of the first banks to have branches all over the country. Right? And believe it or not, back in the 80s, there was a statute that said banks can only operate in one state. They were only allowed. You could never find, like Chase Manhattan Bank, which was in New York at the time, would never be in Florida. You could never, that was not allowed until around 1984, 85, a new statute allowed banks to go national. So this bank was First Nationwide Savings, had branches in California, Florida, and New York. And they were being sued by Nationwide Insurance for using the name Nationwide. That was the case. They were
Nationwide, the Nationwide is on your
That's
side, the
right. The
logo. Okay.
Nationwide Insurance,
Yeah.
yes, exactly. The Nationwide
Okay.
Insurance that we all know and love. So
Okay.
they were trying to stop this bank from using Nationwide under the theory that insurance companies were doing a lot more financial stuff and that people could confuse First Nationwide Savings Bank as being somehow connected to Nationwide Insurance when there was no connection. So my job was to fly around the country and visit other companies that used the name Nationwide, right? There was Nationwide Moving Company, Nationwide Stationery Company. There were Nationwides all over this country, in cities all over. And the theory was Nationwide is a generic word. You can't trademark a generic descriptive word. So I would fly into a city at 19 years old, rent a car, book a hotel, and we didn't have GPS back then, right? I would get a Dun& Bradstreet report with a business and an address and a map. And I would look at the map and try to find where this business was located, take my rent-a-car, go drive to this business, go in and say, listen, I'm doing a survey. Can you please give me something that has your name on it? And they would give me a pen, a letterhead, a business card, something. And I would take it. And then I would go on to the next one. And sometimes it involved a 2 or 3 day trip. Sometimes it was a 4 or 5 day trip. And I would stay in a hotel and stay in a hotel room and visit these businesses. And at the end of the maybe 7 or 8 trips that I did, I probably collected about 50, 60 pieces of items from these nationwide businesses. And then we went to trial. And I testified at the trial.
Really?
I was like the investigator. They called me to the witness. And it was a federal case. It's federal court. I'll never forget, the judge's name was a Judge Grisey in the Southern District of New York. And I testified under oath, and I would pull out all the things that I found. You know, the button, the letterhead, the pen, you know, all the paraphernalia with all the Nationwide stuff on it. And we won the case. The judge bought that Nationwide was a generic word and can't be trademarked.
How did you feel about sitting there you're 19 years old?
Yeah.
You've been flying across the country. How did you feel sitting there and seeing the courtroom experience? Was that something that really motivated you?
It was amazing. I got to tell you, it was probably the most influential factor of my life because, I mean, this was a federal courthouse, very formal. The formalities were, I mean, you know, but the differences between a state court situation and a federal court, it's night and day. You know, in the federal court system, things are just so formal and so, you know, really by the book. You know, everything you see on TV is really from the federal court system. And it was just so great an experience for me at that age.
And the trust that they placed in you too. I mean, that seems like
Yeah.
a very important part of the case.
Yeah.
They're
Yeah, it really
sending you
was.
across the country, and then they're having you come in and testify. I mean,
Yeah.
they must have been very impressed because that's it sounds like a very pivotal point.
Yeah, it was. It's funny because my boss was a real character, and you know, and he would always joke after the trial about me testifying, because I guess, you know, listen, as a 19-year-old kid, it wasn't like yes sir, yes no, you know, yes sir, this. It was more like yep, you know, that's kind of how I was in. So for I stayed with the firm for another year after that. They kept me on to do stuff for them. And then when I graduated law school, during law school, I worked for them for a few summers. They kept me on. I mean, I had a great relationship with this firm, but he always joked about when I testified and how I would answer the questions in a very, informal, laid back kind of way, as opposed to with the formality that a federal court requires. I was a street kid from Brooklyn. What did I know about testifying, right?
All right. So you're working at this patent firm, or you're interning at this patent firm, but obviously that's not where the trajectory went. So where did you go after law school?
Right. So what happened now was I wound up, right. So I went to law school at Tulane, which was in New Orleans, in Louisiana, and I wound up going after Tulane, even though I had done work for this firm now for, I think it was, I did one summer. Because one summer of law school, I went traveling and actually took law courses at Hebrew University in Israel for a month. But then now it came time to graduate, and I was looking for more trial experience. That's really what I wanted. I kind of got involved with moot court and doing a lot of trial work at Tulane that I really enjoyed, standing up, picking a jury, doing that kind of work. So I wound up starting my career after graduation with the district attorney's office, the prosecutor's office in New York.
Now that's generally a really good place to start to get the trial experience where
Exactly.
you wouldn't get it otherwise.
Exactly. There was no way I was going to get trial experience working, especially for a trademark and patent firm. They don't do a lot of trial work. I mean, it was really cool that I was hired on a case that did go to trial, but they really don't do a lot of it. And I really wanted to be able to get into a courtroom. So I had been told that working for the government is not financially lucrative, but it's experience lucrative. And it was. I mean, from the first month of being there, I was already doing 25, 30 traffic court trials a week. Before you're even legally admitted to the bar, they have a waiver that allows law school graduates to do those minor type of things. So I was doing traffic court trials for the first month, and then once the bar results came out, then I moved up to do misdemeanors, and then it became felonies, and I was doing a trial a month. So the trial work was great. I mean, I was picking juries, I was arguing with lawyers and judges. And
What do you think is the most valuable piece of experience that you got while being at the prosecutor's office?
probably just, the fact of, listen, the great thing of working for government is that while they give you a lot of independence to do your case, there's a lot of supervision. So that, in other words, if I was ever involved in an issue that I wasn't aware of what to do, or I wasn't sure of what to do, we had supervisors. And you could always, the supervisor's door, we had amazing supervisors, and their doors were always open, and you could always run into a supervisor's office in the middle of your trial. Judge, I need a break, give us an adjournment, a little time. Supervisor, this is what's going on. And they would guide you and tell you the best way to handle it. And then you'd go back into the courtroom. Now you know the best way to handle something. And the learning experience was just, you couldn't beat it. You couldn't beat it. You couldn't go wrong because, you were in situations that you were learning to be independent and do things on your own. Yet if you ever got to that point where you had a question or you were unsure of something, you had great supervision to help you get through it. And it was just an amazing experience. It really was.
So you gather all of this experience, you get all of this experience that you would not get any other place. But eventually there's certainly a financial constraint to working for the government, and you decide to step out into private practice.
Right.
Where do you go next? What's your first foray into private practice?
Right. So this is where the luck of the draw can really help you out, right? So what happens is one of the last cases that I did in the prosecutor's office was a manslaughter case where a person in his car ran down somebody walking in the street, right? Just purposely ran them over. And she was severely injured, didn't die, but we were prosecuting the driver because he intentionally ran this person down. Turns out it wound up being a not guilty, or not, I shouldn't say not guilty, but it was an insanity defense. And we sent him to our psychologist who confirmed that his story was that his radio was telling him to run down this person on the street. And he had visions and he had a history of being somebody who had voices in his head telling him to do things. So we had him examined by our expert, and our expert agreed that the right thing to do in this case was a not guilty by reason of insanity. Now, the advantage here was that the woman's family, she was still alive, but the woman's family was pursuing a personal injury case, an auto accident case against the driver. Now, if it turned out that it was an intentional act, the auto policy would deny coverage and there would be no insurance coverage, right? Because you're not covered under your auto policy for an intentional act. But if it was a not guilty by reason of insanity plea, then you're covered because that's not intentional. It's not an intentional act.
That is a really interesting distinction.
Yes.
Which probably most people would never even think about.
Right.
That the not guilty by insanity really was the best way to do the justice.
For her, it was the best way, so that she could have access to I think it was a $500,000 auto policy that was up for grabs. And what was happening was the PI firm, the personal injury firm representing her and the family, had an investigator that would meet with me on a regular basis to ask me to update them on the status of the case, which, the family authorized me to speak to them, and I didn't divulge anything that was privileged, but I would tell them what was in the public record about the case, and I would continually meet with their investigator and advise them, and they pushed me. They said, we really want this plea. So now you've got, not only is our expert saying this is the right plea, but now I've got the victim telling me that they're okay with this plea. So we went ahead and did that plea, and they were able to resolve their personal injury case and get the policy for this woman who was run down. At the same time, the investigator was telling me that the firm is looking to hire attorneys, right?
Okay.
They're looking to hire additional trial attorneys to work for the firm. So he said to me, you should interview. I think you'd be a great candidate. So I reached out to the firm. Now, at the prosecutor's office, we had a 3-year commitment, right? Because they trained us and they wanted us to give, and I was just about at the end of my 3-year commitment. It was almost up. I think within a month it would have been up. So I went and interviewed with the firm, and they hired me. And so I went to work for this firm in Manhattan that did mostly personal injury work, but was looking to expand to other things. They were looking to do matrimonial. They were looking to do real estate. They were looking to do collection. They wanted to do all sorts of other things, even though their primary focus was personal injury. And they hired me as the trial experience guy to do all the other things. I did very little personal injury at this firm. I actually wound up doing more matrimonial and real estate stuff than anything else. And I was very successful in what I did. Very successful.
Very, very serendipitous. You go from the prosecutor's office and you're prosecuting this case that leads you to the personal injury firm. Correct. Where you don't practice the personal injury side of things and you get into matrimonial law. That is a very unique arc that I think is led you to exactly where you needed to be. So you're starting to do matrimonial work.
Correct.
How does that differ from, obviously it's very different from the prosecutor's office, but how do you make that adjustment from being a prosecutor to being a matrimonial attorney and dealing with different kinds of problems?
Well, yes, although again, there are many times at the prosecutor's office where we were dealing with battered women syndrome, right? And assaulting girlfriends and assaulting boyfriends and, couples that were fighting and where it got violent. There's a whole courtroom dedicated to those types of cases. So some of the experience from doing those cases were able to kind of bridge me into doing some matrimonial work in terms of the issues that couples deal with, whether they're physically fighting with each other or even if they're emotionally fighting with each other, right? So it was something we always dealt with as a prosecutor. In fact, we even had training in some of these issues as a prosecutor. So the transition to doing family and matrimonial law wasn't that difficult to do, other than learning in New York what we call the domestic relations law, which was the body of law that dealt with family. And I, of course, had to learn that. And, you take the CLEs, the continuing legal education classes to learn about it. And the more you deal with it and the more you get involved in it, the more you learn. And, I came to know we had a guy up in New York that would do a seminar twice a year, a full day seminar twice a year. And you kind of teach yourself from learning from him. And the litigation part was the same. I mean, the rules of evidence are the same for criminal or civil. It's getting documents into evidence, getting testimony, doing direct when you're doing your witness direct and the opposing witness is cross. I mean, the trial stuff was the same. Doing depositions was a little different. I'd never done really an outside deposition, but you kind of sit down and you see, what do I need to know? And you make your outline and then you just ask away. You ask your questions.
So how does that, so I can see that being very similar, right? But the dealing with people, dealing with clients has got to be a different experience. So what's your approach to dealing with clients and how do you make them feel comfortable?
Right. So, again, as different as you may think it is, remember that as a prosecutor, we also deal with victims. Right? We do deal with victims as a prosecutor. So I was learning how to deal with 99% of the criminal prosecutions that I dealt with involved a victim in some way, shape, or form. So with victims, you develop this sense of sympathy that carried over to civil law when we're dealing with parties that need the extra TLC or the extra comfort or the extra, whatever to get them through. And I've come to learn over the years that, everybody ultimately gets through it, right? That's the thing, is you have to be strong. And that's been my philosophy from the beginning, is to try to counsel clients that this is a very, very difficult time, that it's understandably difficult to get through. What I always try to tell them, and seems to work and is completely true, is you'll get through it. You'll survive. And you may even become stronger for it.
So the advice that you give to clients that are going through a really difficult time is going to be,
you'll get through it. Eventually, you're going to look back on this time and you're going to say, I'm glad I did it. I'm glad I got to where I am now. I'm stronger for it and I can survive. And I find it, I've never, ever, ever had a client, almost 40 years, that said to me, I'm sorry I went through that. I'm sorry I did it. Have I had some clients that have said to me, I'm done, I don't want to go through this anymore, I want to get back together and work it out? Yes, of course, and there's nothing wrong with that. But most clients that go through it and come through the end, they want to celebrate. They really, literally want to celebrate. And I'm there to help them celebrate. And I tell them when they're going through it, there will come a time where you will celebrate and you'll be happy. Because happiness sometimes is worth so much more than the fighting and the battling and the dragging and it's an enormous weight off your shoulders when it's all done and you can now go on with the rest of your life. And that's what I tell them. That's what I tell my clients. And it's true. They know it's true.
That's great. So you're up in New York. What brought you down to Florida? How did you end up from New York to Florida? I mean, I know there's this Jerry Seinfeld thing that he did. He said, my parents were in New York, and so they had to move to Florida. I believe it's the law; it's required that you have to move from New York to Florida at some point in your life. But what brought you down here?
So I mean, I'm also myself on my second marriage, right? I was married to somebody up in New York. I had 2 daughters up in New York. We all lived in New York. Once I got divorced, I started dating my current wife, and she actually said to me, "I'd like to." I don't know where this is going to go or what's going to happen, but just so you know, my ultimate dream is to be down in Florida. She loved Florida. She had come down here. I think her brother went to school down here, and she loved visiting down here, and she loved coming down here. And she said to me, I really want to go to Florida. And if you don't, then we should probably not consider doing this. And I said to her, to be honest, listen, I love Florida too. And my parents came down to Florida probably about 35 years ago. When I graduated, they left New York, came down here. They lived in Aventura. They lived in Boynton Beach. They went over to Naples. They came back to Boynton Beach. I mean, they've been all over Florida. And I used to come visit them all the time also. And I mean, you drive around and you see the beach and the ocean and the lakes and the waterways and the palm trees. And it just became something that, I got to tell you, I think I would love to be in Florida too. So my current wife and I decided that at some point, we would make the transition. And then I just worked to make it happen. We had to take the bar exam. I hadn't taken a test in 35 years, so had to study for the bar exam. And, took the exam and passed. And then I was like, okay, let's go buy a house. So we bought a house, and then it became, okay, we got a house, we got a bar exam. What else do we need? Let's go, let's do it. I needed a job. I had to get a job. So I had my own firm in New York for 30 years or so, all by myself. I said, I got to go find a job. So I came down, found a job with a firm, and everything just fell into place. The timing was
Quite an excellent firm at that.
yes. Would you say so yourself?
But you mentioned you were previously divorced and with kids. Does that give you some different insights or different perspectives that maybe some other attorneys would not have?
Absolutely, absolutely, 1,000%. I tell everybody that comes in the door that I am a product of the divorce, because I remember when I went through my divorce, it was hell. It was really hell. It was very, very difficult. I had young kids. I had an ex-wife that really wasn't working much, and she needed whatever she needed, and I was on my own. It wasn't like I had a paycheck. It's very simple when you have a regular paycheck and a W-2, calculate what you have to pay. But when you're on your own with your own business, it becomes much more difficult, right? Because there's always the suspicion that you're hiding money, you're hiding assets, you're hiding things that, they don't see. And it doesn't make sense why you're claiming you don't only make this when we had a life like that. So it was very difficult. It was a really tough thing. And the best advice I always got was from somebody who had also gone through it was, it's just money, you'll make more. And that led me to move through my divorce pretty quickly. And finally, I did have, the old adage of, attorney who represents himself has a fool for an attorney, right? You know that old thing, right?
Yes, yeah, I'm familiar with that one.
Okay, so I had an attorney representing me, and my wife had an attorney representing her, and her attorney, according to my attorney, was completely off her rocker, didn't know what she was doing. And I, at some point, just said to my attorney, let me see if I can work this out with my wife. And we did. We were able to work it out, and we got the thing done, and we signed it, and we moved on with our lives. And she got remarried, and I got remarried, and we're friends now, and we have two beautiful daughters. It worked out. It really worked out. It's difficult when you go through it, but once you're through it, it works out. And that's, again, that perspective is what I've always counseled to my clients. I went through it. It was difficult. It was hell. I got through it. You will too. And I'm here to help.
So you're a divorce attorney that at one point had his own divorce attorney. What's some advice that you give to clients about keeping that bill down, making sure that the divorce doesn't bankrupt you?
Right. So probably one of the most important things is to offer to do things that can help your case, right? I mean, there's two ways of doing this, right? Either I can do all the things that need to be done for your case, or maybe if there's a thing that you can do for me that can help reduce the cost, why not do it? Why not try to get it done? And there are some clients that are great at that, and I work with them very closely. And I counsel them what I'm looking for, but they put it together. They do it. They get it to me. It's a lot better than me starting from scratch and trying to get things done that listen, I'm not involved in your relationship and your life. Right? I'm not there. I can't put together your affidavit on a motion or a hearing if I don't know what truly happened. So I always ask my clients, give me the facts, write it out for me, put it together for me. I'll turn it into an affidavit, rather than me spend an hour on the phone with them drafting everything up and then send it to them. Is this okay? Back and forth. So there are things that can be done by the client that will tremendously reduce the cost. And I have no problem with that. I mean, the theory that an attorney just wants to make a buck and make as much as possible, that doesn't an issue when you're as busy as we are here, right? We are really busy here. We've got enough cases to keep us busy all day, all night, all weekend, all the time. There's no issue there. If you want to help your case and save some money, if I need you to do something or work with me on something, work with me. Get back to me. Respond to me. Don't let it sit there. Don't avoid it. Get it done right away. It'll save you so much money. And then the final thing is, look, you can either pay me another $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 to go through trial on your case, or you can agree to maybe take 5 or 10 less and settle your case. Right? So what financially makes sense there? And I always counsel clients from, if you want to try to settle your case and resolve your case, then you might have to give something up. You don't want to? No problem. We'll fight tooth and nail all the way to the end. But if you're willing to give up a little to get it done, move on with your life, save attorney's fees, I think it's better. And that's the advice that was given to me when I went through it, and I think it worked.
That's really good advice. So we're going to switch gears a little bit, and I'm going to ask you some questions, some rapid fire questions. And what I'd like you to do is just repeat the question and then try to answer it in about 30, 60 seconds, something like that. And I know that we've gone over these before. These are the questions that you typically get asked by new consultation, by new clients. So let's start with family. How does the divorce process work?
How does the divorce process work? Hire an attorney, meet with the attorney, be honest with the attorney, give all the facts to the attorney, the papers get filed, mediate the case, give in a little bit to try to get things cased. Everybody walking out of there unhappy is probably the best thing you're going to get. If you're not getting what you're entitled to, then you got to go to court, you litigate the case, and you let the judge decide. That's really all there is to it.
Seems like a simple process, but there are lots of caveats in there.
A lot of caveats and a lot more fill in the blanks.
What will I be entitled to when the process ends?
What will I be entitled to when the process ends? So again, a lot of that is dependent on your income and your assets, right? Florida has a presumption of 50-50 time sharing. So that's usually, unless there's some major issue there, how it goes. 50-50 time sharing means you have an equal number of overnights. There's a formula for child support. There's a formula now for alimony, right? There's a final formula now, 35% of the difference in income for a number of years, usually around half the length of the marriage. There's no more permanent alimony in Florida, so that's kind of a formula. Usually the assets are split 50-50, right? So the only variable is how much the parties earn. And while you think hiding income is the best way to go, it's not. You wind up paying more. Be honest with your income. Let the formulas work themselves out. Get the case done. That's really the best way to do it.
All right. Well, how much will the divorce case cost?
Good question. How much will the divorce case cost? I get that all the time. As you know, the way the fees work is usually we start with a retainer amount. Right? The retainer amount is paid, and we send an invoice every month, and we're very upfront and honest about our invoices. We bill out at an hourly rate off of that retainer amount. When the retainer gets used up, we usually ask for another payment, right? Now, how far is that going to go? Well, truthfully, that's contingent on two factors. You and your spouse, right? If the two of you are willing to negotiate and bend a little bit and compromise, the fees are going to be a lot less than if it's going to wind up being litigation and a war. And litigation and war costs money, and there's nothing I can do to change that. And it's not only necessarily based on you. It could be you, it could be the most reasonable person in the world. But if your spouse is not, there's nothing I can do. The old thing I like to use is, I would love to go put a gun to the other side's head and say, sign this document or I'm going to shoot you. But I can't do that. Right? All you can do is litigate and let the judge decide. So the truth is, I can't tell you what the end result is going to be. I can only tell you that the more you're willing to compromise, the less it's going to cost.
All right, switching gears to personal injury cases. So what is no fault in a personal injury case?
Right. So it's funny because I just had a conversation with a good friend of mine where he was completely confused. Oh, what is no fault in a personal injury case? Sorry.
There you go.
Okay. I just had a friend of mine who I spoke to the other day, and he was completely confused about what no fault means, right? No fault is a concept that basically means you're in an accident with another car. The no fault provision basically says your insurance is going to pay for your out-of-pocket expenses, right? That's lost wages, medical bills, prescriptions. The other guy's insurance is going to pay for his out-of-pocket expenses, right? You can't get out-of-pocket expenses from him. He can't get out-of-pocket expenses from you, regardless of who's at fault. That's no fault, okay? It has nothing to do with a pain and suffering claim, which you can make against the other car if they're liable, right? And it has nothing to do with your property damage. Right? Your property damage, you can get your property damage paid if it's the other guy's fault. Right? And the conversation I was having with the guy was, oh, well, it's no fault. New York at the time it was a New York conversation because I do personal injury both in New York and Florida, but the concept is the same. In New York, we have no fault. So it doesn't matter that the driver backed into the other car. It's no fault, so they both have to pay their own damage. And I'm like, no, that's not what no fault means. If The driver backed into the other guy's car, he's at fault, and he's going to have to pay the property damage of the other car. The only place that no fault would come in is if either one of them was injured or have out-of-pocket loss from that injury. Then the driver who backed in's insurance pays for his injuries and out-of-pocket for injury, and the guy who got hit, his insurance pays for his injury and out-of-pocket loss from injury. That's where no fault applies. That's the only place no fault.
How about, can I continue working during the personal injury case?
Can I continue working during a personal injury case? I get asked that all the time, right? I can't tell a person whether they should continue working or not. I'm not the doctor. I can tell the person that the more work you miss because of your injuries from the accident, the more your case is worth. Not that you'll get the lost wages, because again, that comes from the no fault. But by being out of work for a month, for 2 months, for 3 months, your pain and suffering claim goes up. So you can recover more for your pain and suffering if you're unable to do the normal activities that you normally do had you not been injured. But I can't tell you not to work. That's a medical decision between you and your doctor. And it's only between the two of you to decide if you can continue working.
How about, how much will I get from my personal injury claim?
How much will I get for my personal injury claim? Again, it all depends on how much injury you have, right? If your injury, right, the normal auto accident case, we call it a soft tissue case, right? Usually it doesn't involve broken bones or surgeries. Sometimes they do, and clearly those cases are worth a lot more money. But usually we have a neck problem or a back problem. Sometimes you get a tear in the shoulder, a tear in the knee. Sometimes you get these types of injuries. We call them soft tissue injuries. A soft tissue injury case, there's a range, usually anywhere from $10,000 to maybe $25,000, maybe pushing $30,000. Again, it all depends on how much time from work did you miss, how severe is that soft tissue injury, and what treatment did you have, right? Did you have injections? Did you have traction? Did you have surgery? Right? So the only way I can tell you what your case is going to be worth is after I've collected all of the medical records and we know what the injury actually is, what the treatment is, how far the treatment goes, and then I can give you an idea of what I think the case is worth. But only after that can I do it.
All right. How about, how are fees paid to an attorney in a personal injury case?
Okay, how are fees paid to an attorney in a personal injury case? So fees are contingent, right? They are contingent. It's probably one of the only places where it is a contingency fee. It all depends on the amount of recovery, which is kind of good to a potential personal injury client because you're not paying me to carry the case, right? So I have to carry the case. I lay out the expenses, I pay the expenses, I give my time. So you're not paying me anything. I'm taking a percentage at the end. Now, the advantage to you is not only that you're not laying out anything during the course of the case, but also, clearly, the more I get for you, the more I get for me. Right? So it's in my best interest to make sure that you get the maximum amount of recovery. It's a contingency fee case. So in New York, the standard is 1/3, right? It's a flat, usually a 1/3, no matter what stage the case is at. In Florida, there are different levels of fee depending on how far the case goes. 30% if it's until litigation. It goes to 35% once you file the lawsuit and start doing some discovery. And if there's a trial, it's 40%. It's kind of an upscale. The more you get, the more time and work you put into the case. That's how it works in Florida.
Well, Joe, it's been absolutely eye-opening, and I really appreciate your time. Is there anything you'd like to conclude with? Any final thoughts to everybody listening out there?
I guess the only final thought I would give is, and I hate to say it, but be careful with attorneys. There are some really, really great attorneys out there who clearly know what they're doing and do the right thing for their clients. And I like to think our firm consists of attorneys like that. But there are also a lot of attorneys out there who kind of don't know what they're doing and really cause a lot more problems in cases, and you got to be careful. You got to get a good feel. Meet with the attorney you're thinking of hiring, talk to them, get a feel for them. Usually, if your gut reaction is something is not right here, it usually isn't right. And I would say try to meet with somebody else or talk to somebody else. If your gut feeling is good, go with the attorney and trust that they'll do the right thing. But as soon as you feel that they're not, question it. Don't be afraid to do that.
So for everybody out there who wants to meet with you, how do we get in contact with you?
So you can reach us here at the firm at our number, which is 561-353-2800. And we've got somebody standing by 24/7. Take a message, get a message over to us. And we've got emails. You know, all the attorneys here have emails. My email is jsoffer, S-O-F-F-E-R, my last name, at kleinattorneys.com. We're located in Boca, but we handle cases all over South Florida. So we're not difficult.
New York.
And New York. That's right, and New York.
Well, Joe, thank you again for being a guest here at the Freedom to Start Fresh podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please don't forget to subscribe, like us, leave a comment below, and feel free to reach out to us.
And I always end with, if you enjoyed the podcast, yes, my name is Joseph Soffer, and if you didn't enjoy it, it's Kunal Mirchandani.